So, welcome everyone to another episode of Chatbout Toronto. I am your host, Miss T.
And I am your girl, Mel Black Rose, aka Malaysia.
And today we have the most amazing guest. We are honored to have with us, joining us today, Trey Anthony. Trey, welcome to the show.
Yay. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
So for all of you guys, I'm sure Toronto recognizes our girl, Trey Anthony. So for those of you who don't know, Trey Anthony is I'm going to read you a little bit of her bio.
Yes.
Trey is a British-born Canadian playwright, actor, and producer. And I'm sure all of you know her best work is the play and the TV series, The Kink in My Hair.
Can I add that she is actually the first Black woman to actually have her own TV show in Canada, period.
Period.
This is a legend we have here that we have on Chatbout right now.
A legend. Thank you.
Inspiration. So Trey, tell us, first of all, I want to say, I think you know that your play and TV show actually spoke to so many of us, Black women, Black families, Caribbean, African, the diaspora. I think you know that the impact you had. But how did it feel when you heard that your play was going to be made into a TV series?
Oh my goodness. It was really mind-blowing. And I have to say, it would not have happened without my co-creator, Ngozi Paul. A lot of times I get the distinction of being called the first Black woman in Canada to have my own TV show, but it really was a co-create based on the play. So it was Ngozi Paul and I both were the first Black women, but a lot of people credit me because of my play, because it was based on the play. But Ngozi Paul was instrumental in getting the show, the play adapted into a TV show. And she pushed and pushed because, to be honest with you, as some of us know, sometimes we lack the vision and the insight of our own greatness. Yes. And she kept saying, Trey, this should be turned into a TV show. And I kept going, I don't know about that. I don't see it as a TV show. And she was like, no, Trey, this could be a TV show. So she was the one who really pushed for that. And we were very fortunate that she really had the determination, she had the vision, and she had the insight, and she brought me along for the ride, right?
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So I really have to give credit where it's due. Yeah.
Yes. Well, accolades to both of you. That's really great.
Thank you.
Very good. So that leads us to the next major thing that you have poured yourself into, and that is this book.
Yeah.
In love with herself. Let me tell you something. I've been reading this book, as you can see, all of my little sticky notes, okay? It is a great, great book. So tell us a little bit about this book and how did you get started? What made you write this?
Black Girl in Love with Herself came about like so many of my projects where I've always been a big advocate of self-help, self-love. And I don't think there is a self-help book out there that I have not read, right? I'm that chick, right?
Yeah.
And I would go to all of these self-help conferences, especially through Hay House. And I recognized often when I was reading these books, as much as they resonated with me, there was always something that was just not quite there for me navigating through the world as a Black woman in the self-help space. So for example, like Sheryl Sandberg's book, Lean In. And she was like, oh, women, we got to lean in. And I was like, okay, I'm going to lean in. And then I realized, I was like, hey, girl, you can't lean in like that because you're a Black woman, right? And if you lean in like that, how Cheryl's telling you to lean in, you're going to be labeled aggressive. Intimidating, not a team player, right? So there were certain things, or when they said go to therapy, and I recognize there's an extra layer for us as Black women and a stigma which is attached to that. When they talk about mental health, there's also another layer for us. And so it came down to where they say, if the book that you want hasn't been written, then it's up to you. And I kept looking around for this book that would speak directly to me as a Black woman. And I couldn't find it. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to write this myself. And also when I first got the book deal through Hay House, they had asked me not only to touch on all of these subject matters, but also to do a book about how Black women can be in a healthy and loving relationship and how they can manifest a wonderful partner and relationships. And at that time, when I got the book deal, I truly thought I was one of these women in a healthy, loving relationship. So I was like, oh, I can write this book. Plus, I can talk about mental health. Plus, I can talk about therapy. Plus, I can talk about all of these things. And then 5 months before my book was due, what I thought was my healthy, wonderful relationship blew up in my face. Oh, and I was left with a 2-week-old baby. I had less than 2 weeks to move out of the condo that I had shared with my partner. We were going into a pandemic. And to say that I was on the bathroom floor was an understatement. I say to people, I was underneath the bathroom floor. That was the only way to describe it. And I called my publisher and I said, there's no way I can write this book again about how Black women could be in healthy relationships if I've missed the tsunami that has hit my own life, right? And she was like, okay, well, what can you write? We've already given you the damn money, right? We've given you an advancement, which, as you know, you done spent already, right? And I was like, okay. So she was like, you better write something. And I was like, you know what? The book I can write is, how did I miss all of these red flags? And why was I so invested in having people write #couple goals underneath my picture? And that I was so invested in checking in how many likes I got under that same picture that I didn't check in with my own self about whether or not I was happy. And I said, I feel there's a lot of us as Black women are in things that we have no business being in, right? Or we're selling ourselves short, or we're waiting for somebody to pick us and choose us. And even if we do get picked and chosen, a lot of times they are not loving us correctly. Yeah. And so I was like, I'm going to write that book of what do you do as a Black woman when you forgot how to love yourself because you gave over that job to someone else to love you. And so that's what this book, Black Girl in Love with Herself, became about. Yeah.
Can I tell you, the book has so much to unpack, especially when I read the beginning. What I bawl.
I'm telling you.
Yes, girl.
I was like, I don't think you understand how sometimes it's like when you see other people who you see in the media, you see them out there and they're being so vulnerable. It makes a difference because it makes the way we feel a little bit normal, because when we're looking at you, we're seeing this superwoman. Right. We're not seeing the things that come, are behind the scenes. So we're just assuming, and for you to be able to be vulnerable with us.
And you were really vulnerable, like,
yeah.
And thank you for that, because, like Mel said, you speak to so many people when you show that level of vulnerability, because everybody is busy masking the real life things that they're feeling and dealing with. And when you actually hear someone, it just like, you just resonate. Like, there's so much in that book that resonated with me that I was just like, wow, I just can't even wait to talk to Trey, because honestly, a lot.
It was important to me to be that vulnerable, because I really felt, like Mel said, the level of vulnerability in that book. I wanted women to know that, especially in the era of Instagram, right, where you're seeing everybody's highlight reels, right? And I was guilty of this too, of always posting all of the good stuff, and nobody knew what was going on behind the scenes. Right. And I felt the only way I could be true, not only to myself, but to other women, was to be this vulnerable and be this raw and say, this is what is going on with me. And I know I'm not alone. And so I think this is why this book has spoken to so many women, and they're not only buying it for themselves, they're buying it for their mothers, they're buying it for their sisters, they're buying it for their best friends. They're just buying them and just saying, you need to read this book. Because they realize that you're not alone. And a lot of times when you're going through stuff, you think it's just you, and you're looking at everybody else on Instagram and going, well, they look like they're living, this wonderful super life. Then what's wrong with me? And so I wanted women to know that it's okay not to feel okay. It's okay to not have all the answers. It's okay to wake up one day and not recognize your own damn life. It's okay to feel scared. It's okay to feel vulnerable. It's okay to say, wow, I really messed this up.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I got myself in this mess.
That is honestly one of the major things that I got from it, because as Black women, you know, we're always being told to be strong, hold it together, keep going, you got this, come on, don't fall apart. And that was the part that really struck me, is that you gave people permission to just fall apart.
Yes,
fall apart, but you know, put yourself back together, you know, and it was okay. And you know, you talked about the vulnerability you felt with different friends. You talked about like how some friends were like that type of, you know, stay strong, pull it together, like your mom, pull it together, you got this, keep going. And you talked about your other friends that you were able to just fall apart and cry in their arms and wail and keep going over the issues and until you felt better about it. And they even told you that you weren't crying enough. You know, do you find talk about the value in having different types of friends that allow that? Because I think in the Black community, that's something that's sometimes missing in our friendships.
Yes. Like I mentioned in the book and what you talked about, for me, where I felt the lines really were very clear and distinct for me was around my friendships with white women and my friendships with Black women. And as I mentioned in the book, that I found with my Black friends, I was scared to say, I really am not handling this. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm feeling overwhelmed. And I recognize, as I put in the book, I recognize that I had been the exact same friend that my friends were being to me, where when my friends were down, I would send them, you know, empowering quotes, and I'd be like, girl, you got this, or don't let this mash you up, gal, come on, right? And those is how my mother also spoke to me. Like, there was a part in the book where I mentioned where my mother turned to me and said, y'all gonna make this kill you? Right? And she said, remember whose mother you whose daughter you are and whose granddaughter you are. Like, pull yourself together. And I recognized, I said, at that moment, I didn't need a pep talk. I didn't need people to tell me, girl, you got this, or don't worry. I needed someone to say to me, Trey, this must really hurt. And you may need to want to cry about this, and you should be crying about this more, and you can fall apart. And I recognize a lot of us, because that's who we have been conditioned to be as Black women, is get up. Even when we know we don't have an ounce of strength left in us, we find it and we get up. And I said, that has definitely helped so many of us, because I think a lot of us who are professional, quote unquote, success stories have used that kind of energy to really propel our careers, to propel our families. But that same level of energy also is killing us. Because we don't recognize when we're tired. We don't recognize when we are suffering from fatigue. We don't recognize when mental health has been destroying us. We don't recognize physically when our bodies can no longer do that. And I said, I realized, and I wrote in my journal that day when my mom said that, I said, I need to create safe spaces, not only for myself, but for other Black women. And right now, my mother is not the safe space I need. I need to be vulnerable, and I need to know it's okay, that she's okay with my vulnerability. And I knew she wasn't. Like, she just did not want to see that. Right.
I think that's for most Black women, right? Like, we don't know how to, we don't know how to show each other affection at all. Like, I remember when I started hanging out with my friends who were Filipino, and they would hug me and give me kisses on the cheek. I was like, yo, why are you touching me for? Like, I would, you know, I get agitated, you know, it's like, but then after I realized, no, like, this is how you show love, and it's okay. But when you try to reciprocate, when you try to bring that with your Black friends or your Black female friends, sometimes it's hard. Like, me and Tasha hug all the time. It's not common though. And we have to, as Black women, have to learn how to be more compassionate towards each other. I think that's what your book was showing too, right?
And I think it's too because of not all of us, but I would say a strong majority of us have been raised in households where our families weren't as affectionate. We weren't saying, I love you. What we got are those pep talks of like, you got to work twice as hard. You got to get back up. You got to show them who's in charge. You don't let them break you. And so we walk around with that. And then that also then becomes the norm in our friendships. right?
That's right.
And so for me, I was like, I need to dismantle that. And I need to stop doing it as well to my other Black sister friends, because I was that person to so many of my friends as well. So now I really try to be intentional that when my friends are going through things, I'm like, I'm sorry that you're going through that. That must really hurt. How are you feeling about that? And I actually leave space for them to answer. I don't wait for the answer of, oh, I'm fine. I'm like, no, girl, seriously. How are you feeling about that? Right? And we have to start having those kind of conversations that feel tender with each other. Right? Like, you know, in the book, I put the quote from Audre Lorde. She said, if there's one thing that we have forgotten as Black women is how to be tender with each other. And we need to go back to that level of tenderness and love for each other.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Absolutely.
And, you know, too, even like, we're so used to saying, like, I know I grew up in a home where it's just like, something's wrong. Aradwa, just go and do some prayers. You go to church. Everything will be fine. The prayers, everything. So my depression's gonna go away. Nothing's gonna happen to me because just the prayers. You know, and that's another.
That's another thing, you know. And as you guys know in the book, I talk about being finally diagnosed with depression, and I did not recognize that I had depression, right? And funny enough, as I wrote in the book, I was interviewing, right, a psychiatrist, a Black psychiatrist, about how to recognize depression in Black women. And as I was writing down for this book all of the signs of depression, if she was naming 10 of them, I had 15 out of 10 of them. Right? And she wrote, and she said in the interview, Black women, we do not recognize when we're depressed. A lot of times we think we are failing, or by the time we actually seek medical treatment, our symptoms are usually 3 times worse than white women because we are in denial. And I recognized that I was one of those Black women that she was talking about, that my symptoms were so huge and so overwhelming. And yet I still was going through everything, not knowing that it was okay to say, what? Wait a second, this actually isn't normal how you're feeling. And you're going through a lot. And when I went to see a therapist and she finally diagnosed me with depression, she was like, 1, you are going through a breakup. 2, you are moving. 3, you just had a new baby. 4, you are in a pandemic. 5, you're now worried about finances. And she said, one of these things would cause major stress in anybody's life. You are going through 5 of these things at the same time. And you don't feel that you needed to seek help. And she was like, why would you not seek help? And I said, because I thought I could manage it like I always do. And I didn't recognize how overwhelmed I was feeling. Right. Wow. And so, and it's the same thing, like, listen, my family would say to me, bring it to God. God is not a sleeping God. Talk to God. And yes, those things are good. But you also sometimes need to seek professional help.
Absolutely.
Right. And it's okay. And there's no shame in that to say I need help.
And that's the point right there. There's no shame in saying I need help. And I think that's the part that a lot of us shy away from admitting when we need help, because we don't want to feel shame. We don't want to feel like the one person who's like, they're like, well, she like, she's just breaking down for every little thing. Like, so you just you tend to, like, you know, pull it together and pretend. And the other part too is that as a mother, I can speak to this too, is that you end up being that way with your children.
Yes.
End up kind of when your children are going through really difficult times, whether it be with friends or school or just socializing, whatever, you tend to do the same thing to them, not recognizing that you're overlooking major things that could lead to other problems down the road. You know,
it is so true, because I'm sure every single one of us has grown up in a household where if you start to cry, you hear, you want me to give you something to cry about? What is wrong with you? Right? And so those are the kind of things that we need to stop doing. Right? Like even now I have my son, and when my son falls and he cries, I don't say, oh, nothing's wrong with you. I'm like, oh, did that hurt? Oh, that's okay. You can cry, baby, cry. Because I want him to be in touch with his feelings. Because I didn't grow up in a household where I was told it was okay to cry. It was quite the opposite, you know? So we have to start looking at ways where, as Black people, we have done well and we have excelled and we have survived under really harsh conditions, but we also have to look at how this survival has stopped us from being tender and kind to one another and to ourselves.
Yeah. And Trey, you talked about having your friend, your white friends that kind of nurtured that soft side of you. Do you think that that's something that most Black women should have, is friends outside of their race to kind of, help? Not that it's necessary, but do you feel like it would aid in having a little bit of a different perspective?
Always important to have different perspectives, but I do believe, and this is what I have said, I believe we have it in us as Black women. I know there's a safety and level that, as much as I have really great white friends, there is something about a sisterhood that I feel with my Black friends that cannot ever be achieved in the same level with my white female friends, right? And so I think what it comes down to now, and I've recognized since I have shifted, my Black sister friends have also shifted, because now, like, when they say to me, hey Trey, how are you? And before I would be like, oh girl, I'm good, girl, I got this. Now I'd be like, hey girl, I'm telling you, I just drove to Burger King, went to the drive-through, I ate a whole damn Whopper in my car by myself, gulped down a strawberry shortcake drink. The kid went to bed without a bath. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. I'm behind on a lot of my projects. I feel like I'm not a good mom. I don't think I'm handling this today. When I say stuff like that, it then opens up the door to my other friends going, girl, let me tell you what happened to me.
Right.
And we have now become much more tender with each other. So I think if we start to shift how we support each other, it naturally becomes this domino effect, a ripple effect, where we start to be different with each other. And so the change begins with you. So I do believe we are capable of that. I really do believe it. And I think we want it.
Yeah.
But we just didn't believe that it was safe enough to achieve that with other Black women.
Yeah.
So I definitely think we can do it, because I've seen it, how things have shifted within my own Black sister friend circle.
Right. I think in your book, you also talked about we just have to learn how to trust each other, because of, based on Black women just need to learn, just again, be vulnerable and learn to trust each other, and, take what our parents and our grandparents are saying about friendship and people out of our head and just start everything as a clean slate. So that part of that really resonated with me when in the book, because I was like, you're right. We do have trust issues with each other. And sometimes we see each other as competition. For no reason.
No reason.
And there's no reason. There is just no reason. And we have to learn to be, because we have been pitted against each other so much, right? That we're always like, okay, if one Black woman's successful at our job, we can't be successful because they only choose one of us, right? And now we have to really be open to know that it's okay, that the more of us are in there, the better it is for us. And like I talked about in the book, where I grew up in a household where my grandmother would be like, don't tell nobody your business. You don't know, so she's jealous of you. She's not your friend. She's not your friend. She's not your friend. The only friend you have is me, right? And so I grew up with this level of paranoia around Black women going, oh, should I trust her? And we have to start looking at those messaging, because my grandmother was wrong. Not every single Black woman is out to get me.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Right? So we have to start looking at that. And I know just from the response of this book that other Black women apparently had my grandmother in their house as well, right? Because they're like, yeah, man, that was the same conversation I had in my household, right?
Everybody's house, African house. I don't even know everybody's house, just different.
Everybody, it's deep. It's deep. It is so deep, and so we have to start looking at, like, where did that messaging come from? What is that about? And that we're not rivals. There is no competition here. I want to see you win just as much as you want. And I keep saying, and I said this in the book, after I started looking at what my grandmother said, I said, this isn't true. Because I would not be the success story today if I didn't have other Black women out there who came and bought tickets for my play, who, bought a flyer, took a flyer and gave it to a friend, who bought the book in droves, right? and watch the TV show. I had Black women who sometimes would be like, I ain't even home, but I left the TV on because I want you to get the ratings, girl. Right? So I was like, this isn't true that we don't support each other.
Right.
Because that is not true. Black women have shown up for me time and time again. So I have to get rid of that paranoia, because the truth is we show up. We show up for each other.
We sure do.
And yes, there's the odd bad-minded gal. We all know the one bad-minded gal, but that's not the truth of the majority of us.
That's right.
Right.
So let's switch gears. Let's talk about, you touched on women's sexuality and their hangups with sex and stuff like that. What do you think are some of the things that women, and not giving away too much that's in the book, but what they can do to get over their sexual hangups with regards to their religion or, culture, or even like stigmas with regards to being called hoe and all that kind of stuff, if you are in tune or in touch with your sexuality?
It is about educating ourselves, right? It's okay. And I'm not going to give away too much in the because it's all in the book, so we will know how to get it and do it right. But as I mentioned in the book, there's this stigma that we have, right? That with Black women, we're either Aunt Jemima or the hot hoe in the video. There's no middle ground for us, right? Or we're the good church girls, right? And so it's really hard for us as Black women to get in touch with our sensuality, our sexuality, how we feel about ourselves, our body. And so we don't have these discussions. Like I know my mom wasn't sitting down talking to me about like, how to have a little alone time with yourself, right? that just wasn't spoken about, right? Or how to ask your partner how to fulfill your needs and what pleasure feels like. All of those things weren't talked about. So we have to start having those kind of conversations, right? And also knowing that it's okay to say we have desire and that we have needs. And if we don't have a partner who's able to do those things for us, how do we create that for ourselves?
Right.
And know that it's okay. So I wrote a whole chapter on that, of love, sex, and desire, because I knew it was important for us to be having these kind of conversations, and also saying, especially if you are not in a relationship, how can you create intimacy with yourself? And also, if you are in a relationship, how can you have these kind of conversations? Because I can't tell you how many women have said to me, listen, man, I've been with the same little dude for 20 years and he still ain't got it right. You know what I mean? So how do we have those conversations to say, hey, boo, we might need to shift a little thing up in the bedroom, right? So that was really important for me to make that also another safe space where us as Black women are able to have those conversations as well.
Right.
Fantastic. So the other thing that you mentioned in the book is about finances, and about like, that's something that really struck me too, about having like, the challenges of growing up in a family that was not necessarily wealthy, to make ends meet. I grew up in a single father home, and he's a musician at that. So even more challenging, right?
Yes.
And you talked about having like, you talked about, what was the wording that you used? Gosh, I can't remember it now, but basically having like fear, like the money fear.
Oh, the money blocks, the blocks.
Yes.
Yes.
So, do you think like taking the steps to learn about money is really the key thing that helps to get over that? Like, I know a lot of people have, like for me, one of the things that gave me my anxiety is money. And being a single parent, money was what sent me scrambling into like the depths of anxiety. And so is learning about money something that would not cure, but at least help get past that? And the money.
Yeah, I was very honest about my level of knowledge around money and the conversations or the non-conversations that were happening in my household, right? Yeah. The only thing I ever was told about money in my house was don't spend it, right? And then to buy a house, right? So that was it.
And it's hard to get it.
Conversation, right? It's like at the end of the day, you've made it if you bought your own home. That's about it, right? And so I talked about how, because I had this fear around money, and I didn't have the knowledge or education. I wasn't having conversations about stocks. I wasn't having conversations about, wealth management or, leaving a legacy for your children. I wasn't having any of that kind of conversation. I knew nothing about it. And so my biggest fear all of the time was always that I was going to end up broke, or my child would not be able to be provided for because I didn't have the money. And so it was only when my relationship blew up in my face, I recognized how much control I had given over to my partner, because I thought my partner had much more knowledge around money. And that then also left me very helpless, right? And so in the book, not only do I talk and give examples of where women can go to get coaching around money issues, how to deal with your own money blocks, I also give affirmations. Affirmations have really helped to release some of that fear.
Girl. All of those affirmations, girl. Those affirmations at the end was clutch. Because after, you compose yourself, and then, you have your questions, you write down the answers. And then even when you go through, it's like the affirmation is just like, ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. Because we have to really name our fears, and we have to say, it's something that I've struggled with. And as I mentioned in the book, I've been in times in my life where I made $12,000 a year, and times when I was making high six figures a year, and I still had the same amount of fear. It didn't go away. Right. And so I was just like, then what is wrong? Because it didn't matter how many zeros were at the end of my bank account. I still had that fear of I was going to run out of money, or I wasn't good with money. And so I recognized that that was something that I had to really address for myself and to empower myself. And that was a chapter that I knew I needed to put in the book, because so many women had told me they had the same level of irrational fears and also non-knowledge about money. And so I really wanted to empower us as Black women to say, come on, let's get this together. Let's address it. Let's take a look at this, because we need to take a look at this, because we need to be better about this kind of thing. And for me, especially having a child now, I knew that my mother struggled to make ends meet with 3 children as a single mom. And I wanted to make sure that my son knew more about money than I did.
I think that's one of the things that I still struggle with, as much as I've learned a lot more than I did years ago. I still have like this trepidation that grips my heart when I think about money and how am I going to get it, and how, that was one of the chapters that I bookmarked, because I'm reading through it again to, to do that work, One of the other messages that your book has screaming right through it is setting family boundaries. I think that was the other thing that really struck with me. Being the go-to person in your family is oftentimes, right? Mel is, I am, I'm sure you are. Like, being that go-to person it's a gift and a curse, because you want to be able to be there to help your family, and you're happy that you're able to have, that level of I don't know if it's wisdom or if it's, get it done girl type of energy that they always come to you. But setting the family boundaries was one of the key things that I read, and I will continue to read. And how did you know that was what you had to do? When did it strike you that that's what needs to happen here?
I think because traditionally, right, as in the African culture, the West Indian culture, we're told, right, that you respect your elders. You don't tell your mom no, right? You just don't. You don't say, oh, this ain't gonna happen, mom, right? Or this ain't gonna happen, grandma.
No,
right?
Do it yourself,
right? You figure it out, right? And just the tone of saying certain things would make your teeth go missing. Right? Like my mom would box me in my mouth, right? That's as simple as it goes.
Absolutely.
So that was one of the hardest things of really negotiating respect, not only for myself, but also respect for my mother and my grandmother as elders, but also being able to set boundaries that felt true to me. And for me, it was because I recognized that I couldn't be everything and everyone to everybody at all times. And it was draining and it was killing me. And as I mentioned in the book, a lot of women who are buying this book, many of us are the quote unquote successful ones of the family, right? We are the super women of the family. And so people are used to coming to us, And so for me, I had to recognize that I had to still love my family, but I also had to love myself first. And I had to recognize, and that's what I talk about in the book, of how do we really navigate that and negotiate that in a way that feels true to us. And that was something that was also missing in a lot of self-help books, where they were like, oh, just tell your family, Just like that doesn't happen.
Whose family?
In our culture, right? It doesn't happen like that. So that was another layer that I was like, I need to talk about this because we're not brought up like that, right?
At
like
all.
we talk, we're not taught, I've had my white friends who are like, when my parents get old, I've already talked to them about putting them in an old people's home. And I'm like, what? So we don't know that kind of stuff. That's not our culture. Right? Like, I remember when I was buying my house, the first thing I was looking at was like, okay, where's grandma going to stay? And I bought a house where the master bedroom was on the lower level because I was like, grandma's going to move in with me, right? That's what we do. Like, we take care of our own. But because we do those things, that also is another stress of what's that like looking after elderly parents? What is that like looking after sick relatives? And we don't talk about that extra layer of how that impacts us as Black women, because 9 out of 10 times it falls on us, and especially if you're the firstborn in the family. Right?
You're triggering me right now, Trey.
Right? It falls on us. And that's just the truth. That is the truth.
Yeah.
And other self-help white authors weren't getting that we don't move through the world where you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to throw them in a old people's home. That's not how we were raised, right?
No.
So that was something that I was like, we have to start talking about that because our parents are getting older. Right? So there's a lot of things that are falling on us. We have brothers and sisters who are also used to us being the ones who handle stuff in our families. We've got to recognize that, especially if you're making good money, you're also the one who's the ATM to a lot of the family stuff. So I really knew I had to write a chapter about that because our needs look very different than our white counterparts. And culturally, we have to examine how we can navigate that world in a way that also feels authentic to us, but also safe, right?
Right. And that's what I appreciated about the book, because like you were saying, in previous self-help books, they say, set those boundaries and everything's going to be great. But you just show that you have to be consistent with your boundaries because they're not going to like it. They're not going to be comfortable with it. But for your own sanity, you need to actually push it. And eventually they will understand. They probably will still be upset about it, but it's still a process where we have to understand at some point where, no, we're going to continue this way. And that's what I appreciated about you. Because sometimes when I read those books, I just get pissed off. I'm like, what do you mean no? Just tell somebody no. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's one thing I did appreciate in the book too. And
it's something that it's continuous, right? Like it's not like there are days that I'm really good with it. And then there are some days I'm a little wishy-washy. And then I'm like, you got to remind yourself and you got to remind them this is how they're going to treat you. This is how it's going to go down today. Right. So that is really important for us, that just to know that it's a continuous journey. And the more you do it, the easier it becomes. But it's hard because there is going to be kickback, right? And pushback from our families.
And they get angry with you when you don't do what they expect that you've always done. Like they're like, so you don't love us no more? Like, what's really happening here? Like, like it just feels like you're abandoning the family if you just say no,
Yes.
So.
And I got it all the time. Like my family was like, my mom would say, oh, she's so selfish. She's so about herself. And I was just like, because I've said no, I've become selfish. But so you have to get used to that, of hearing things, right? Because that will be the talk of, oh, she's selfish. She's all for herself. But it's okay to be like, yeah, you know what? I'm actually carving out this time for myself today. and that's okay.
Yeah,
You
that's
know?
the other thing is like a
Right.
lot of times we're being taught that being selfish is bad, and it's not always bad. If you're always selfish, it's bad. But if you have
Yes.
moments where you put yourself first, that there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing at all.
Nothing at all wrong with that
We
at
have to
all.
just keep reminding ourselves. So the
Mhm.
other thing I want to touch on is what you talked about in the book is about Black fatigue and dealing with microaggressions in the world, but also in the workplace. And like, what would you say to women who feel kind of overlooked in the workplace because of
Undervalued.
yeah, in their workplace?
Yeah.
How do they get past that?
It really is about, again, going back to safe spaces and also finding other Black women who can support you, be it in your workplace or outside, making those connections with your sister friends, also being able to recognize when these microaggressions are happening at work, and knowing sometimes you got to step out of that place if it's feeling really toxic to you, that you have other Black women who could be like, girl, I get it. I know it, you know, because it looks a lot different for us and it can be very subtle for us, you know, like I'm currently dealing with something very like that made me question, you know, is this really happening? And I was like, no, girl, this is happening.
Yeah.
This is really happening.
That's exactly how you
feel. Do stuff to us that is so subtle. It makes you go, no.
Did I really say
that? Yeah. And then you talk to another friend and they're like, yeah, girl, it's happening. Right? This is really happening.
That's real.
They're playing. Right? So we have to be able to recognize it and also be able to have difficult conversations with people who are maybe our higher ups or people who we are working with, and do it in a way that we're still able to still keep our little job and our money, right? But also being able to have some kind of voice. And if that's not what you're able to do, then to maybe have those discussions with people outside your job so you feel supported, right? So for me, it was really important to put that chapter in the book because so many of us are dealing with microaggressions in our work. You know, I talked about it in the book when we were doing the TV show and how we were labeled at one point, Ngozi and I, as, you know, not team players. And we had like another white woman who worked with us who said she felt intimidated by us and all of this kind of stuff. And you're just like, come on, really? You know, so there's just so many different ways that we need to create more support for us in our work life and to create that work-life balance.
Yeah.
And I guess that's why you touch on therapy and how important therapy is.
Oh, girl.
But you also talked about trust me, I just started going.
Girl, listen. All of us should be going. Like we should be we should be buying therapy for our mothers, our sisters, our best friend. And it's not just a white girl thing, you know. And so that is why I wrote a chapter on therapy. I also wrote how to find a therapist, how important it is also to find a Black therapist. I gave resources in the back of the book of places that offer therapy at reduced rates for Black women, because I wanted us to have no excuse, you know. And there's a popular meme of that, and I wrote it in the book where it says, I'm in therapy to deal with people in my family who need to be in therapy, right? So, and that is the truth. Sometimes it's not us who needs the therapy, but we got to deal with those people in our family whose asses should be going, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
it's true, like,
you know,
it's true because sometimes sorry, my apologies.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying, like, sometimes your therapist will say something and they're able to bring it back to past trauma, but you as yourself, you're just thinking, you're just coping, and they'll be like, maybe because of this, and they'll be like, oh yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is so true, because I know when all of this happened in my life, it would have been very easy for me to place 100% of the blame on my ex. But I realized that I also had made choices in this, and unhealthy choices, and overlooked certain things because the dynamics that were playing out in my relationship were very, very similar to the dynamics that played out in my household as a child. And sometimes we don't recognize that what feels familiar it's really sometimes really unhealthy, and it feels familiar because some of us grew up in really unhealthy households. Right. So we pick things that feel like, oh, I know this. So because I know this, must be good for me. Yes. But what we don't recognize is that we're playing out a lot of our childhood traumas, right? Mm-hmm. And so that is what therapy was able to allow me to recognize the cycles and the things and the unhealthy dynamics in my family, how that was playing out in my current relationships, my past relationship, even my friendships, even conflict on my jobs. Like, this is how I moved through the world. And the only thing that was constant in all of this drama was me, right? So I had to go, what is going on with you that you keep making these choices over and over again? And only when you go to therapy, you're able to unpack those kind of things and go, oh, I now see this cycle and why I'm like this, right?
So Trey, if there were 3 things that you wanted your readers of this book to take away, 3 major lessons, because you touched on everything. Like, I really have to say, this book was so well done. You've touched on almost, I can't even think, I say almost just because, but I think you've touched on every issue that Black women face in today's world. Like, I really do. If there's 3 things you want Black women to take away from this book, what would you say are the 3 major lessons?
The first one is, it's never too late to be the woman you want to be. It's never too late. It doesn't matter if you're 40, 50, 60, 70. I remember after reading that book, my mother, I've seen things shift for her, right? And my mother will sometimes say, well, I'm doing this because I'm a Black girl in love with myself. Right? Or sometimes she'll be arguing with one of us and she goes, you know something, I think I need to go to therapy. I need to go to therapy. Right? Oh my God. And I realized if my mother, who's this, really set in her way Jamaican woman, is shifting certain things, we can shift, right? So when it's never too late to be the woman that you want to be, right? Yes. Right? That's the other thing. The second thing I would say is we have to get over that whole thing of pick me, choose me, I need you to love me. And give that job over to someone else to love us. That we have to recognize that no one completes us. Make people catch you loving yourself. So when they show up, they're contributing to that love, but they're not the only love. And for many, many years, I was guilty because I was running on a love deficit of picking people that I needed to fill me up, right? And be like, oh, once they choose me, then I'm lovable. And I had to really recognize I had to choose myself first. So that is the second big message that I want to get over to Black women. And then the third one is, girl, we don't have to be strong. We don't have to be these strong Black women at all times. Yes, there's times in our lives that we need to be strong. But it is not something that we have to do 24 hours a day, 365 days of the year, and act like things are always okay and that we got this. We got to be able to recognize I ain't got this today. And maybe in this hour, I ain't got it. And maybe I need to slow down. Maybe I need to accept help, even when it's offered. Because a lot of us too, people are offering to help us and we don't take it because we're like, oh, no, girl, it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. We're good. Right. So that's the other
thing. It away. See how Mel's laughing?
Right. Right. We're all guilty of it. We're all guilty of it. Of being like, no, I got this. And we wear this badge of honor of how strong and great we are, across our chest, when that's literally killing us. So those are really my biggest takeaways. And if there's a fourth thing is, not only be tender to each other, but be tender to yourself. Like, I literally sometimes will look in the mirror and I will kind of go, hey, Trey, I know you're scared and I love you. We're going to figure this out. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going to be kind to you today. I don't need to rough up myself to get through a day. Right. I'd be like, come on. Sometimes I'm like, you know what? You're tired. You're feeling overwhelmed. Okay, Trey. Okay. That's okay. Take a little rest.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Like even before this podcast today, the old me would never have done that. I was feeling tired and I took an hour nap. And I was like, it's okay for me to take a nap. The old me would be like, well, you're lazy, you're turning into a croft, you're what list, all of those kind of things.
Middle day, you're sleeping.
Like, no. Yeah, because you're sleeping in, because I grew up in a household where nobody rested, right? So that was the thing, I talked about in the book how my mother would walk into our room at 7:00 in the morning, 7 days a week. Like there must be something constructive you could be doing with your time. So I grew up in a household where you do not rest. You always had to look busy.
Yeah.
And that was something now that I incorporate into my life weekly, of taking naps, of resting, taking days off, having white space in my calendar, because I realized I can't be a superwoman to everybody all times.
Those are great messages. Honestly, like I said, this was a fantastic book. I am so glad you wrote this book. This is going to be one of the things that I continue to visit, because the messaging in here, there's so many truths. This is like real talk. It's a book full of truths, full of vulnerability, full of activities, things that like, it's an actual self-help book. Like it's a real one, and it speaks to us as Black women. So Trey, thank you so much.
Thank you. Fantastic job. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm telling you, women, go out and get that book.
Yes.
Buy it for your friends and family. It's anywhere books are sold. And the other thing that I did want to quickly mention, there's also an Audible book for those busy women who are just like, I don't have time to pick up a book right now. You can listen to it in your car. You can listen to it at the gym. And there's a bonus interview on the Audible book with my mom and my sister after they had read the book, their response to it, which people are just loving, because my mom is just, she out of control. She out of control, right? So
that is fantastic. Oh, I'm going to get the Audible book too, because that's a good thing. Like you said, listening to it in the car, or, that's fantastic.
Yeah. And especially with the affirmations, and I feel like that would be a perfect thing to just be listening. You should just create the affirmations and just make them like when you hit on Spotify and you have like those like little albums that they have, you could have like your affirmation, so like people can hear it all the time.
Oh, I love that.
Because you do have a very nice voice, so you might as well just keep it going.
Thanks, girl. All right. Yeah. I go take that. I like that. That's a great advice. Thank you, girl. Thank you.
Trey, thank you so much for joining us and being our guest on Chatbout Toronto. We love this interview. I know I did. I enjoyed it thoroughly. And I wish you much success. And again, audience, go buy the book. Go get the book.
Thank you ever so much. Thank you ever so much for having me. I truly appreciate it, and all of your love and support. And thank you to everybody who's listening. Please follow me at blackgirlinlove on Instagram, and go buy my damn book, Black Girl in Love, with herself.
Thank you so much. So we'll talk to you guys later, and thanks for tuning in to another episode of Chatbout Toronto. I'm your girl, Miss T.
And I'm your girl, Black Rose.
We'll see you next week.
Peace.